Hi everyone, I'm Vincent. I'm a software engineer who's been working in payments for a number of years and e-commerce and crowdfunding. So this is a little bit of lessons learned in kind of staying safe as an online merchant. I gave a talk last year about software engineering and payments as kind of a follow-up since there was some interest in this topic. So we're going to talk about credit cards, and I'll tell you why. We'll go over some attacks and threats, the motivation and methods behind those, and how to defend, and balancing risk at the end. So why are we talking about credit cards and debit cards in this? It's pretty much the same thing for all intents and purposes. So despite all these cool wallet methods and everything, credit and debit card combined are still the majority of online payments. So if you as an online merchant want to sell your wares, you're going to need to accept credit and debit cards. Oh yeah, like Apple Pay, Google Pay, PayPal. Yep. So even if you're using your credit card through Google Pay or Apple Pay, they'll consider that a wallet, because there's some extra protections around that, which we'll get into a little bit later. But right now we're going to talk about the credit card. You probably have a few in your pocket. The main feature of a credit card is this 16-digit number known as the PAN, or the primary account number. It's made up of a few parts. The first 6 to now 8 digits, depending on the card, is what's called the BIN, or also the IIN, issuer identification number, because the issuer is not always a bank. The first couple digits here, even like the first digit for some cards, you can determine the card type. So like 4, I believe, is always Visa, 5 is always MasterCard. Some of them you need like the first 4-ish digits should disambiguate any card in terms of the card network. And this is considered like safe information. So PCI will allow you to store this. You can look it up, so you could use bin list to look up the first 6 to 8 digits and find out all kinds of information about the card. And this is useful because the processors use this to route the card to the right network, and then the network uses it to route it to the appropriate issuer. The second set of digits is the account identifier, so that's your account with that bank. And then the final digit here doesn't even add information. It's really only 15 digits, and the last digit is derived. So there's like a little checksum, right? And that's just to prevent typos and that kind of thing. So if you had the first 15 digits of a credit card number, you could just derive the last one. Expiration date, it's not just an expiration date, it's also used to, that specific date is used to validate the card when you're using it. Card holder name, which is, believe it or not, almost never verified in any sort of way, particularly online. And the EMV chip, this is my poor ASCII representation of an EMV chip. I did my best. But this is, I think the idea of this came out in the 80s, and then they rolled it out in the 90s. But it's this little embedded computer. Believe it or not, a lot of them run Java. And this, rather than just static information, there's a whole handshake that happens here. And it's more secure, it's harder to clone, all these cool things. There's also that chip. If you have a contactless payment, that same chip is at the brains, and then you have this antenna. So when you tap to pay, it's using the same chip in just a slightly different way. So there's, outside of the scope of this talk, all the cool things you can do with EMV for in-person payments, but you don't have that when you're online. Back of the card, we got the mag stripe, the signature line, which doesn't matter. The CVV, though, this is important for online payments. This is a secret code. Nobody's allowed to store it. It's supposed to authenticate you as the card holder. So all these characteristics of the card, you can't use these when you're not there. But the idea of using your card when you're not there is pretty old. So mail order and telephone, they call that MODO. Fax, it's still a thing, believe it or not. and then, the internet. That's what we're talking about today. So no EMV, no magstripe. How do you make a payment online? So, using your credit card online, you might see something like this: the name, number, expiration date, CVV, full billing address. So what do you think it actually takes to move money? It's actually usually just this, and the rest is risk-based. So just that 16-digit number, 15-digit number really, which are kind of leaked all over the place, that alone will let you move money with a few caveats. So that's what makes this thing kind of concerning as somebody accepting these. But you get all this information from the issuer. So they'll let you validate the CVV, and it's not pass-fail, it's actually more complicated than that. Address, kind of, they just pretty much validate the numbers. Cardholder name, this is very rare to ever do this, but there are services depending on the card. And then 3D Secure, which we'll get into, it's not entirely in your control as a merchant. Continuing with the overview of credit cards. So this is just kind of a diagram showing the relationship between the cardholder and the merchant, facilitated by the card brands, moving money from the issuing bank to the acquiring bank. Now, information-wise, you're going to go through some processor acquirer, and based on the BIN, they're going to send that request to the appropriate card network, and then that card network is going to send the request to the appropriate issuing bank. And they all have a small role here. This is kind of the end-to-end information flow. So for example, when you provide your card number and CVV, that's going to get passed to the issuing bank, who's going to give a response. Just a little overview of credit cards so we can have a productive discussion here. So we'll go over threats. We're going to go over 3 major threats: data thieves, card testers, and fraudsters. This isn't an exhaustive list, but it's a pretty good one. We're not going to cover ATO-friendly fraud or phishing, but this will be a pretty good set of things. So the first one is data thieves. And my daughter provided this illustration here of a data thief. So they're looking to get your card details in 2 ways. One, through skimming. So like in a physical world, this would be like, this is really popular 10 plus years ago. It was like you swipe your credit card at the gas station, and there's a device in there that's skimming the card details while also letting it go through. This is important because if they're noticed and then the thing gets pulled and then the whole operation is off. So this kind of thing exists online as well. And they're also looking for card data at rest. Hopefully you're not providing this, but you'd be surprised how many folks are still logging credit card numbers or thinking that they can, obscure them in some way, and jackpot. So why, go ahead. Well, yeah, it's just because it's like a 15-digit number. So like if you hash it, it's really easy to guess it, right? So you could encrypt it, right? And like maybe rely on, really strong encryption and having the keys hidden and everything. But yeah, hashing is really not great because it's really easy to guess the number, and then you have all the other information around it. Why are data thieves trying to steal credit card data? Well, they can sell it in online marketplaces to criminals who would then use it for fraud, or they can use it for fraud themselves. High-profile case of stealing card data is this 2018 British Airways hack, where 380,000 cardholder details were compromised, including CVV, right? So this is like high-quality data. And the attackers were able to get these card details through both of the means I mentioned, which is skimming, and they also found 95 days worth of transactions in unencrypted logs, so full PAN, CVV, and I think address as well. So, detection, mitigation. I don't know how many of you are familiar with PCI. This is a little tongue-in-cheek, right? In that PCI is this kind of really onerous, hundreds of pages of documentation and what do you call it, survey to protect cardholder data, but there's so much irrelevant stuff like, oh, make sure you're running antivirus and that you have badged access to card data, that the actual like interesting technical stuff gets kind of buried, but there is some good stuff in there. So broadly, they're giving you guidance on protecting the data at rest and in transit. And that includes maintaining a secure network, and then strong access controls and monitoring. So we'll go through a bit of that, and then they can fine you for non-compliance. If you're a small shop, you can actually self-assess. They give you a little BuzzFeed quiz, and you just answer yes to everything, and you're good to go. If you're a larger merchant, you actually have somebody assess you, sometimes in person. So here's like a really naively bad example of what you shouldn't do, but this still exists in the world, right? So let's say you have some checkout page on your site, and it's unencrypted. Well, certainly anybody that could monitor the network could take the card details here. So let's say you're on a public network. Anybody along the right could grab this information. So this is like a really, really obvious one that maybe wasn't obvious in like the 90s, that you should encrypt such things. So, oh, look at that. Now it's encrypted and everything's safe, but you still have to worry about bad guys getting into your server, right? Because you're still sending this really, really volatile data to your server. So now you have this little jackpot over here. So a different way, like the modern way, you should probably think about it, is using a tokenization service. And so you'd have some client code running in a browser that would take care of the card details, and they never hit your server, right? So I hit some tokenization endpoint on my form, I get back a token, and then my server it just sends this token in the payload. So even if my server is fully compromised, it's just this little token, and I'm not storing card data. This doesn't get you out of the woods completely. Go ahead. Yeah, so like Stripe or Adyen for sure. Like the way their SDKs work, I'm not even sure. I think you can probably send them raw pans, but like they're out of any of these like kind of consumery payment platforms will provide that for you. So yeah, now you're just sending the token, but mind the front end. I didn't go into too much detail here, but let's say you're doing something like this. So this became popular, right? This is like the appropriate thing to do, but the problem is attackers understand like this is now the way, and they look at compromising the front end. So that like that British Airways attack, they found a way to compromise the front end, right? And so they intercepted the card details on the front end. There's a e-commerce thing called Magento, which is very popular. And because they got hacked so bad, the front end card attack is called the Mage card attack, named after Magento. So there's some updated guidance on this actually from PCI. This is, I don't know, in the last year or so. You realize this is a really common attack pattern now. And so things like embedding an iframe that like if the parent code gets compromised, can't tamper with. Sub-resource integrity, so like if you're including some script, you include some hash so that it can't be compromised. And they also want to monitor changes in files and things like that. Yeah. Yeah. Storing card data, this is just you don't have a good reason to do this in this day and age. If you need to like store payment methods, just use a vault. There's a bunch of them. I can't think of any reason why in the year 2025. So just don't store it. Don't log it. Don't store it. Store, references to things in a vault. That's it for data thieves. And now we'll get into the more interesting part. Card testers. Another illustration by my daughter. So card testers are using you as an online merchant as a way to either test out unverified card data that was purchased in bulk, right? Maybe it's old, maybe it's cobbled together from previous breaches, but this is like this boringly commoditized criminal enterprise here, where you run a bunch of unverified card details against the naive merchant, and then you take the attested data and sell it for more. And there's even a really unsophisticated high volume attack called bin stuffing. So that's that first 6 to 8 digits on a card. Given that, guess the rest. So at high enough volume, you can find valid cards and guess the CVV, guess the expiration date, guess the zip code. At high enough volume, this is a thing that yields results for attackers. So like I said, they can sell the data or they can use it themselves. There's these online marketplaces, from the dark web. But data quality is a major factor in price, so there's this market for cleaning card data. So again, this is very high volume to pull this off by nature. So hopefully you've monitored just like your baseline metrics here. They should be going a little wonky. There are slow drip attacks that might be harder to detect, but generally these are high volume attacks, so you should see some anomalous patterns. Auth rates you would expect to go down, right? Because they're testing out a bunch of bad cards. You'd expect auth rates to go down, or conversion in general. You might see anomalous traffic sources and patterns, so suddenly you're getting a bunch of attempts from a market you don't operate in. A lot of low value transactions, so to bypass a lot of risk rules, they'll usually find the lowest value transaction they can make and use that. And then the lagging indicator, the unfortunate one, is chargebacks. So that's when, let's say I had my card compromised, and then later I see my statement, I go, I didn't make that charge, so I charge it back, or I report my card stolen. The money is reversed, and then me as the merchant who accepted that money, I get fined $15 per transaction. So there's the low hanging fruit here is the basic stuff you do for bot protection and rate limiting. So CAPTCHA and run a CDN, all this stuff, it will absolutely not stop card testing. But what this does is it drives up the cost and lowers the volume. And then you can also use the data provided by the issuer. So like I mentioned, you can validate CVV. You can validate the address. Usually it's just the postal code or the number for the home address. You can test the name, but again, that's very rare to actually be able to get that signal. There's 3DS, which isn't a great mitigation for this per se, but we'll talk about it. So CVV, don't ever store this. Again, this is the secret code that authenticates you as the card holder. It's that little number at the back of your card, I think front of the card for an Amex. But this isn't actually a pass-fail thing. When you send this through, you're going to get one of these responses. Well, the processor might absorb some of this for you. But it's not pass-fail. It's kind of murky here, and then you have to make a decision what to do with this based on everything else. But you can use this as signal. AVS is a similar thing. So it's pretty common to just use zip code here, at the gas station. That's a common thing. Just type in your zip code. A lot of online forms, if you're not being shipped something, we'll just ask for your zip code. For the street matching, it's usually they're just looking at the number for the street anyways. But again, it comes in this kind of murky response. It's not as pass-fail as you think. And then there's this 3D Secure. This is really, really popular and mandated in most of the world, but not here. So this is not entirely up to the merchant. You can request an exemption, and you can say, I've run all these checks. Please don't prompt for 3DS because it's a bad experience. And then you can also say, this looks kind of suspicious. I want you to do a 3DS check. But it's ultimately up to the issuer to do this. And it's kind of this MFA for your credit card. Has anybody experienced this? 2 hands out of the whole room? It's very rare, right? Much more popular in Europe. And there's 3DS 2, which is the same thing. It's lower friction. I think 3DS1 was really, really clunky. 3DS2 has like lower friction flows, and they even have like a invisible reCAPTCHA kind of thing where the issuer does a bunch of fanciness on their side and makes a decision. But for the most part, it's kind of this MFA thing that is really annoying if you get to it, but obviously is a pretty good deterrent for bad actors. For card testers, don't be a cheap oracle, right? They're running a bunch of card details against you to see what's good. Try not to be too helpful with your error messages, like the CV is incorrect. Okay, cool, I just need to change that and then run it again, right? So this is why you'll get kind of not very helpful error messages on a lot of sites when your card details are wrong. It can be kind of frustrating, but this is why. If you're too helpful, you're a cheap oracle for the criminals. There's other step-ups, right? So you could have an annoying 3DS MFA prompt. You could be really heavy-handed and say, oh, we want to do a liveness check and hold up your ID, but there's trade-offs, right? That adds friction. So last we'll talk about fraudsters, the final illustration provided by my daughter. So this is where criminals use stolen credit card details to purchase things that they can then resell, like expensive electronics, or directly extract money through self-payment, purchasing gift cards. If it's a marketplace, they can buy stuff from themselves. So this is a big problem, billions of dollars, card not present fraud in the US alone. And really, US is kind of in the worst spot here because of we don't enforce 3DS and all these other things. So the percentage of fraud is also mostly card not present these days, because card present, you've got the chip and you've got all these other things, whereas online we're lagging quite a bit. Detection, this is harder, right? So on the card testing attacks, they're really high volume. We've now distilled these high volume things into a set of very, what goes for a lot of money, attested, verified card details. So it's going to get kind of lost in the noise if you have otherwise high volume. Auth rates and conversion hits maybe, because again, they're now hitting you with what's verified card details, so they're going to have a pretty good success rate. And then of course, you still have chargebacks to worry about, and that's usually going to be for much higher dollar amounts, right? They've gone through the pain of verifying this card details, they paid good money for it, so these chargebacks are going to hit a little harder. So unfortunately in the US, almost all the liability is on the merchant for you to make this decision. Like I mentioned before, you have CVV, AVS, 3DS. These are things you can check against the issuer to make a decision here. If you're an online merchant shipping goods, you can match the address. That's like a reasonable thing to do. Keep in mind, criminals know how this works, and they'll often match the address and then change the shipping address with the FedEx or UPS, for example. There's tools from vendors. You can make your own in-house rules based on what you know about your business. But unfortunately, this comes to you as the merchant, and this isn't like an ethical choice. Do I accept this money or deny this money if it's fraudulent? Because you don't know, and the risk is on you. So if you accept money that turns out to be fraud, you are fully liable for that. You'll lose the money in chargebacks and fees. And so this is kind of a nuanced thing where the ideal system would block 100% bad of traffic and convert 100% of good customers. It's like the mystical WAF that was supposed to solve all our problems. This doesn't exist. So it comes down to balancing risk and what you know about your business. So there's not really any silver bullets, unfortunately. You just have to pull in different signals and make good decisions. There's a lot of vendors for this. Usually, Stripe and Adyen have their own solutions as well. So like Revenue Protect and Radar. So you can use these tools that'll pull in all these different signals and make good decisions. But unfortunately, again, it's on you as the merchant for the most part to make the right decision here. I said I wasn't going to talk about phishing, but I thought this was relevant. This was a Krebs article that came out a couple weeks ago. So, if you're taking credit cards online, it's kind of risky because of all the things I mentioned, right? It's just that PAN, which is kind of easy to obtain. Wallet transactions are much lower risk, but they are not without risk because there's this whole article on how folks are getting phished into giving up their card details and then answering a prompt where the criminals will then add the credit card to a wallet. And so now these wallet transactions have your stolen credit card on them. And merchants are seeing this and saying, oh, cool, it's a wallet transaction. This is really low risk. So this is a whole criminal enterprise you can read about here. I'll link you to the slides. That's it. So more secure methods are available, like wallets, but they're imperfect and adoption is very slow. Credit cards and debit cards are still the bulk of online transactions. In the US at least, risk is almost entirely on the merchant, so it's up to you to make good decisions here. Be smart about protecting cardholder data. Don't store what you don't need. Hopefully, understanding the value you provide to attackers and understanding this thing that's going on helps you make better decisions to protect yourself. And yeah, don't be an easy or cheap target. There's like really sophisticated methods here, but like I said, the basic stuff, bot protection and rate limiting is gonna save you a lot. So that's the end of the content. Thank you.
Hi, I'm curious, why doesn't US adopt more 3DS verification system then?
I don't know why it's gone that way, but in Europe, it's like the government regulation is what's pushing this down. In the US, it's been like the card networks protecting themselves, so it's just been different. So like you can, as the merchant, do this liability shift where you say, issuer, I want you to do 3DS, and if this is fraudulent, you take full responsibility for it. Whereas, so you have that lever, but in Europe, for whatever reason, the European government has done this to protect consumers versus here, that has not happened.
I've noticed when you buy like low budget airline from Asia, they use that system also. So it's more prevalent in Europe, but not just in Europe. I have a follow-up question. Why is it that sometimes when you use a card online, like the Visa, Chase Visa doesn't work? And from my experience, my Amex almost always works in these cases. Is there, like, what is the difference? Obviously, different banks and different networks, but do they implement these things differently?
Why would a Visa not work when Amex is? I'm not sure. Yeah, I mean, there could be different reasons for that. There are different card networks for like international purchases in particular. Or? Yeah, I'm not sure. I'm not sure.
Hi, thanks, great talk.
Thank you.
If you're a small merchant, does Stripe or PayPal take the risk because they're the ones that are submitting the transaction?
Kind of. Usually not, though. So like my wife runs an online shop, and I was surprised to learn that even though she's on this like e-commerce platform, she's still liable for chargebacks. So it depends. Like for the most part, no. Like it's still you on the merchant. If somebody uses a fraudulent payment, that's on you. You usually eat that cost.
Okay, thank you.
But there are cases when you can again like do some liability shift.
Do you know because you said that the best way to do it is just to not store the card details at all. So for things like subscription services, streaming, or like Amazon, if they deliver something regularly, are they just storing your card details in the way that you said not to, or do they have a vault or some other kind of system where they can do that?
Yeah, I mean, if they're passing PCI audits, they're probably not going through the trouble of storing it themselves. They're using some vendor. But I mean, someone as big as Amazon probably does in a secure way. I'm not quite sure, but yeah, these much larger vendors might find it advantageous to do themselves. Otherwise, yeah, they'll use Braintree, or like you can store your cards on Stripe or Adyen, right? And you get that token back, and all you're storing is that token and some reference to it.
Thank you.
Hi. So recently, I conducted a pen test in which, can you hear me okay? I enumerated upwards of probably 50,000 credit card transaction logs. They were using a payment provider, but they were also using, they stored the masked credit card number, but they didn't mask the first 6 to 8 along with the CVV full name, address. When I approach, I'm getting pushback on the, oh, we're masking it. How can I better illustrate the risk there of just because it's masked, since you're including all of this other crucial data, how can I illustrate that risk in an effective way?
Yeah, I mean, you can point them to card testers. Like that data would be really valuable to card testers, where they just guess what's in between, and then do you want to be the one that provided them that? Yeah, I guess that would be a good way to illustrate it. Guess those numbers in between, because if it's like first 6 plus last 4, then you just fill in the blanks. At high enough volume, you could certainly do that.
Yeah, that's what it is.
Yeah. And yeah, if it's like CVV as well, like they're not ever supposed to log that. So.
Okay, and is there any standards besides PCI, DSS I can kind of point to cite, or any studies or?
Standards-wise, no. And again, PCI is really just about protecting cardholder data. They're not going to help you with preventing fraud or anything like that. So yeah, I'm not sure about any set of standards per se. You could look at like kind of the regulatory pressure in Europe as like a way of protecting cardholders on these other things, right? Yeah, I'm not sure of another set of standards per se.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. So particularly for that first threat on data thieves, just good cybersecurity practices. Look at OWASP, there's a good set of standards to concern yourself with.
First thing first, thanks for the talk. My question is there any specific SDKs which includes built-in security controls for those who is developing or handling the backends of the payment gateways? The reason why I'm asking, because I am working as a penetration tester, and there are a lot of findings we are still found during the penetration testing engagements. Yes, they just start to cross-check the amount should be greater than 0, but it's still, there are many attack vectors. For example, I can still order, for example, iPhones by changing the amount, changing the currency to, let's say, the Cameroon currency. Instead of paying $1,000, I just pay a few bucks and my order successfully handled by the payment gateways. So yeah. I always looking from the attacker sides, but I'm just wondering, is there any specific or universal SDKs you can implement through in general in banking industry or the payment gateways?
I don't think there's any universal SDKs. Maybe there's an open source opportunity there. But there are like reasonable things from vendors, right? So the pen test you're doing is probably somebody who's being clever and rolling their own, and it's decades old, right? But the good news is like a lot of the off-the-shelf stuff, like from Stripe and Adyen and Braintree, are gonna like be pretty good at giving the tools to mitigate a lot of this stuff if you know how to use them. But yeah, I don't know of anything universal. So maybe somebody wants to open source something. It'd be a good project.
Thank you.
Hi. Appreciate the talk. I've always been wary of, as a developer, wary of actually going into e-commerce sites, like taking on customers and opening myself up to a risk because of my not understanding things. I've always been paranoid of the vaults as well because it's a central point of attack. But is verified by Visa. I've been seeing that a lot, where they offload you to the Visa site,
Mm.
and they're the ones verifying your information. Is that one of the tokenization methods?
Yeah, I'm not too familiar with that one, but that's probably an example of one of those liability shifts.
Uh-huh.
That's probably like 3DS2 or something. That's more like akin to wallet. That's specific to Visa. I'm not too familiar with that one, but I would say that's probably one of these examples of like, if you adopt this thing for that transaction, they'll indemnify you.
The other one is more of an observation. Is that what I'm noticing now is that if I've got subscriptions, and I change my card, they automatically charge the new card, and I'm kind of interested in what's going on and
Card
what they actually
updater
keep.
service.
Yeah. So, but that might be a topic.
Yeah, the card updater service is really interesting, right? And it goes back to this like balance/arms race thing. So you want to like keep customers happy, and you also want to not enable fraudsters. So yeah, it happened to me recently. Like I had a card I never even swiped. I'm not sure how it got compromised, but card got stolen. I replaced it, and I was like, oh boy, I'm gonna have to go update a bunch of subscriptions, right? Like some of them maybe they have auto update, or some of them don't. And like I think 99% of it just auto updated because it's really common now. So like these card vaults are smart, right? They're not just storing this raw data. They usually have some integration with the networks. And so this is a service where, a merchant with good reputation will, subscribe to one of these card updater services. So when a customer's card gets compromised, they'll just update it, which is, I think helpful in a lot of circumstances and also creepy in others. But there's also a more nefarious thing where if a bad actor gets your card attached to one of these things, now it's really, really hard to get out, right? So like adding it to a wallet, for example, that's going to be really, really hard to dispute. And like it's possible, once you get that stickiness of the card updater, yeah, yeah. Yeah, I wish there was some way to like opt out of it. It's definitely got the creepy factor too.
Hi, one more over here. Thank you for your talk. It's first time at Scale, and I learned a lot. I was just wanted to ask about that trick where fraudsters can change the shipping address through the shipping vendor. That's happened to me a couple times where I have to go to a FedEx in like Hollywood or something for some reason. And I was wondering if you could expand a little on how that actually works and if there's like defense you can do as a merchant or as a customer.
Yeah, it's been a while since I've worked in e-commerce where you're shipping stuff, but I know this still happens. And if I remember correctly, we had to tell FedEx and UPS not to allow that to happen. And I don't remember exactly how we did that, but that's a thing, right? So I don't know if you can do that on an account basis or a transaction basis, but usually there's some way to say, don't allow the customer to change it. Because otherwise, like given a tracking number and some other information, they call up, do a little social engineering, and they say, oh, I need to update my address, and they reroute it, which is kind of absurd. There's also, I knew of cases where folks would just physically intercept. So like they'd be near wherever the compromised card was from, and they'd intercept it.
Thank you for this talk. Firstly, it was excellent. I had a question for you. In a scenario where two different people asked you to give them advice for selling stuff online, the first would be, say, your grandmother who's not tech savvy, who wants to sell knitted sweaters or something. What would you tell her? And then maybe your best friend who's super tech savvy wants to sell, I don't know, rebranded Raspberry Pis or something as an example. Would you tell them to do two different things or the same thing? Or what would you tell them?
Yeah, so the less tech-savvy person, you'd want like the most consumer-friendly marketplace. Like, don't spin up your own website, for example. And so, I don't know if you're on some online marketplace, I don't want to like name drop, but a lot of them, these two-sided marketplaces, they'll absorb a lot of that risk. But as soon as you have like your own shop and you're kind of considered the merchant, even if you're on one of these platforms that provide such things, you absorb a lot of the risk. So yeah, I would say if you're a little tech savvy, do something where like you are more directly represented as the merchant. Less tech savvy, just use kind of one of these broad consumer marketplaces.
So I'm kind of curious about your perspective on using the almost like burner cards that you can use on a per vendor basis, like what privacy.com does, where you're able to build, like send up a card for a merchant or a specific category, lock it, set the, the actual funding amount to it, and control it. And if you find that it's been compromised, you just burn it, just re-roll a new one.
So yeah, again, this was like from the perspective of a merchant and the risk you take. As a card holder, there's a ton of things you could do. So like definitely a big fan of those, like, you provision this temporary card number and set it for a certain amount. Like broadly speaking though, all the liability is on the merchant, so use the card holder. One thing I would say to do, like as a card holder, don't ever use your debit card. Just use a credit card and pay it off, because the card networks are pushing all the liability onto the merchant. So that's bad news for the merchant. Good news for you as a card holder. Like if your card gets compromised, you don't have any risk. Well, it's very low. I won't say you don't have any risk because there are these like edge cases of liability shifts, but for the most part, like there's a lot of protections on card holders, and there's a few services I think that'll let you like generate a temporary card number. I think that's great. That doesn't really do anything for the merchant, unless everybody used these things. If everybody used these things, there'd be nothing to compromise, right? And then you wouldn't be getting hit by carding attacks and fraud.
You mentioned that wallets like Google Pay and Apple Wallet are much more secure. How as a merchant or would you go about implementing that? What's the best approach?
Yeah, so you need to be working with a processor that accepts them. Rarely are you going to have to like implement it from scratch, but most of the modern processors will have those as payment methods you can accept. And so they're really clever. It's kind of an evolution of what we learned from EMV, where there's this kind of cryptographic exchange, and the number that is generated from these transactions is useless. It looks exactly like a credit card number. It's a 16-digit PAN for all intents and purposes, but it's useless without the cryptographic signature. So it can get leaked 10 ways from Sunday. It's the same. So similar to when you use in-person payments with Google Pay or Apple Pay, which I highly recommend you do. If somebody were to intercept that DPAN on the device, it's useless to them.
Have you met the other side in person and talked to them?
Have I met the other side, the cyber criminals?
Yeah, the cyber criminals, yeah.
Maybe without knowing, yeah.
I noticed that you attended DEF CON. Are they there?
Is this my time to plug the Payment Village at DEF CON? Well, we're not a group of criminals at the Payment Village, though, but like this is where educating professionals on like what's going on in the criminal world. So, yeah. Any more questions? All right, thanks very much. If you want to reach me, here's my info, and then I have a bunch of stickers up here, including Payment Village stickers. So feel free to grab some.